I was in high school at the time. I was 16, and I was in a graphic design class, and I saw this guy with a frontline assembly long sleeve. And I said, hey, what are you working on? And he said, my friend's starting a record label, and I'm doing a tape for him. And that instant, my entire world changed. In the first Prurient show, there was 3 members. One guy was playing a karaoke machine, one guy was playing a electrical saw, and I was playing bass guitar. Now the thing was, at the time in Madison, Wisconsin, no one would book us. You couldn't get a show. There was a lack of venues. But public parks had electricity. So we brought in all these amps, like dead appliances, old television sets, farm equipment, firewood, paint buckets full of sand, all of this junk that we thought culminated in what like industrial was supposed to represent. And at its best, it was like organic industrial music. At its worst, it was just vandalism and juvenile destruction. Most importantly, it was an act of necessity. Everything that happened was because no one would take us seriously. It was because no one would buck us, and we just took matters into our own hands, like so many before us. And it's the DIY ethos that led us here to this moment. And I think you could say the same thing for Justin, 20 years prior. The way I define industrial is cynicism. It's a rejection of the failures of punk, a rejection of the failures of the revolution. If you cannot reject what came before you, you don't have any self-awareness. And if you don't have any self-awareness, you can't change anything. What we've always tried to do with the label and what we try to do with the store was to bridge the gaps of all these various subcultures. To me, what comes down to it at the end of the day is the spirit that's behind all of these musics, and that's what separates us from everybody else. All you need to be a participant is to have the right spirit and the right attitude. Streetcleaner is the definitive moment for the 20-year celebration of Hospital Productions because it is the fusion of sound, imagery, and content. I think what Godflesh means to extreme music is the bridge between various subcultures. What Justin did coming out of the grind and punk background in England in the 80s was a fusion with the industrial aesthetics that existed before that time. They were basically the first band to take a metal sound with an electronic music backbone and create a marriage with the aesthetics of industrial music. And growing up in a Roman Catholic household and Catholic school, seeing the burning cross on the cover was like a prelude to so much that happened later on. And I remember hearing the feedback, even the introduction of Like Rats, with that little bit of feedback. It was clearly an influence for me. I spent 10 years working on just feedback alone, and I give the credit to Streetcleaner. It's an album that is timeless because it continually raises questions, whether they be existential, religious, human, whether they be questions about genre definition or music. And when you present questions and don't provide answers, you're making art. And art is the only weapon that we have against the curse of consciousness. Streetcleaner for me is the ultimate expression of human condition in music, and that is why it has crossed so many genres and so many decades. And even though it is clearly not an album that we had anything to do with in any way. It is the culmination of our influence.
Ultimately, I would say Streetcleaner is a punk, if not post-punk record. Most definitely. We'd already done the Godflesh, the first EP. We put a footprint in what we were trying to achieve, which was like this completely nihilistic, grey area that existed somehow in this void between the excess of metal, noise, power electronics, hip-hop in the context of beats and the weight of a drum machine. You know, there's a variety of influences that really set that record in motion. Obviously, things like the early Killing Joke records, Celtic Frost, Hellhammer, even early Slayer, Swans, of course. You know, the music that impacted me was always simplistic, raw, primal. Industrial music then, for me, was purely what I was brought up on, which was Throbbing Gristle, Whitehouse, Ramley, SPK, Test Department. I loved all the connotations of EBM at the time, you know, this thing of electronic body music and how that could be appropriated by like metal in a way, but not metal. You know, to say metal is almost ridiculous because Godflesh is so ultimately not metal, it's too minimal. I don't see anything that we do as being remotely progressive in any context whatsoever. For me, it was regressive. I wanted to make a regressive, machine-driven music, you know. That and really simplistic, basic, rudimentary metal riffs. And again, you know, from Throbbing Gristle through to Crass, through to Killing Joke, through to the Stranglers, everything was textural. The things that fascinated me was the space between, or the lack of space between, the void between these musics. For me, there was a commonality that I couldn't articulate. And I love the fact that I could not articulate these grey areas, you know. It was accidentally conceptual, Streetcleaner, really, I think. It just fell into place. It was a vehicle for all manner of chaos that was going on in my head, in my life. You know, when we did Napalm Death Scum, and we were writing that material, and I was with Mick Harris, and we were trying to speed the material up, you know. We were trying to reach some end point. I was fascinated with these end points, you know. It's like, how fast can we make this music? How much of a blur? How extreme can we make this, yeah? You know, really at the time, I mean, I was like 19 years old. So in the context of what we were trying to musically do, it was just trying to actually push it and push ourselves, myself as a songwriter and as a texturalist, not as a guitarist or anything else. How this has somehow lasted 30 years almost, I think, is utterly beyond me. But I think somehow there's something so genuinely alien about that record. I've always felt like I don't belong. Wherever I am, I don't feel like I belong. I still don't. So I think it was driven by some weird outsider thing. Some way of trying to translate pure rage and frustration into somehow something tangible, which was, obviously I was still a teenager, so I was completely still, as I am now, utterly frustrated with the human condition, you know. It's not a nostalgic record. I don't think it's representative of a time whatsoever. And this is somehow why it's accidentally timeless.
There's no other band and there's no other record that represents the passion, the love, and the dedication and sacrifice for all of everything that makes up industrial, everything that makes up metal, everything that makes up any kind of underground subcultural movement than Streetcleaner. With Justin, as a guy who's arguably invented possibly 2, maybe 3 genres of music, he's the sweetest, most passionate, dedicated person that I know in the music business. He's never stopped caring.